Hello, everyone. My name is Sevin Yeltekin. I'm the Dean of Simon Business School, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar where I will be moderating a panel of Simon Business School alumni and professionals in the consulting sector who will be sharing their experiences and insights with equity, diversity, and inclusion as they specifically pertain to consulting. This session is going to be recorded and will be posted on the Simon YouTube channel. EDI has received increased exposure and mainstream awareness and is currently regarded as a matter of considerable importance in the corporate sector. What has gone under-recognized is the economic value that exists when EDI is successfully integrated into an organization. There is strong and more documented argument that more diverse organizations are more effective organizations. This has been confirmed in numerous studies, which have demonstrated a strong positive correlation between measures of EDI and traditional measures of corporate and organizational performance, such as profitability, ROI, and shareholder return. In other words, EDI is an underutilized tool in the corporate toolkit that can be used to boost corporate performance. Maximizing the efficacy of EDI is an opportunity to create value. As many of you are aware, Simon has been recognized as one of the top business schools in the United States. Simon recently ranked number 25, best overall business school by Bloomberg Business Week, which acknowledges our ability to provide a cutting edge and relevant MBA curriculum that develops global managerial talent and teach global engagement strategies based on the foundations of collaboration and innovation. We equip our graduates to recognize and adapt to changing marketplaces, understand best management practices, and make decisions in the face of ambiguity. Not coincidentally, Simon has also been ranked as the most diverse MBA program in the US News and World Report. In fact, this is the result of very intentional and deliberate efforts that accrued over 50 years of an evolving strategy advocating for the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion, even before the concept of EDI or DEI, whichever way you use the acronyms, came to be understood as it currently is. Not only were we driven by the moral and social imperative, but Simon's deep understanding of economics, combined with an intensive quantitative focus and cohesive evidence-based approach to decision-making, allowed us to understand the patterns and recognize the framework that underlies and justifies efforts in EDI. Our aim as a business school, as always, is about learning, is to connect the dots between theory, research, and actual business practices. While almost every corporation and institution purports to recognize the importance of EDI, not all of them have been able to implement an effective strategy and are unable to realize the full benefits of such initiatives. This can result in the notion that EDI initiatives are not a good utilization of organizational resources, but execution matters. We hope this panel discussion will import what does and doesn't work in implementing EDI initiatives, the considerations and challenges specific to consulting, and the outcomes that can be traced back to EDI initiatives. By the end of this session, you will have the tools to create a roadmap that will allow you to leverage your own deep familiarity with EDI through your experiences at Simon to carry out effective EDI initiatives at your own organizations. We've structured today's session such that we will reserve some time for questions from the audience at the end. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. So welcome. We have our panelists coming in. All right, and everybody's logged in, so I will just announce your names, and if you could give some brief comments to introduce yourself. We have Josh Goldberg, 2003 MBA graduate, Director of Summit Consulting. Krystalyn Jones, 2019 MBA graduate, Senior Consultant and Cognizant. And Odochi Uwazurike, he's an MBA student, class of 2022, so we'll be graduating at the end of this year. Josh. Unmute yourself, please.
I'm very pleased to be here today. I've been in quantitative finance and modeling for most of my career since Summit. most recently started in the consulting industry. A longtime advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Glad to see that it is getting its due attention at Simon and elsewhere.
Well, thank you very much and welcome. Krystalyn?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and thanks for having me on the panel today. As Dean Sevin mentioned, I'm a senior consultant at Cognizant in the organizational change management practice. So I'm currently the change management lead, helping a Fortune 500 life sciences organization through a major digital transformation of their document management system, which they use to submit health authority applications and clinical trials data and studies globally. And I'm excited to be here today. I have a passion for EDI. When I was at Simon, I was actually the VP of D&I on the Graduate Business Council. So excited to be here and excited for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Krystalyn. Lovely to have you here. And now we move on to Odochi.
Good morning. My name is Adochu Uwazurike. I am a second-year MBA candidate, as Dean Sevin just mentioned. Here at Simon, I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President for case preparation and competitions for the Simon Consulting Club. And I also serve as a Bennett Career Peer. And I am excited to share about my experience this morning and talk about EDI.
All right, well, let's get into some of the what our collective panelists know about and from their experiences in their organizations and what they've learned also at their experiences at Simon. So Krystalyn, my first question is towards you. Given your experience and training at Simon, and you're a relatively new graduate, what surprised you about the general approach taken by the consulting industry towards EDI issues? What was some of the things that really struck you?
Sure, yes, exactly. I graduated from Simon 2 years ago. So when we were there, it was a very extremely diverse program. We had 40% women and almost 15% people of color. So I know within many consulting firms, the diversity numbers are much lower. So already going in, the culture is a little bit less representative. So at first I noticed that walking into a consulting firm, and that was a big difference from Simon. And I think this helps to, this presents a challenge for the consulting industry to be able to really benefit from the synergies and creative solutions that diverse perspectives can bring. So that was the first thing. But I think I've seen a market change from Cognizant's perspective and also the overall consulting industry. And I've seen more of an effort to include EDI in their initiatives and goals of the firm and of the industry through white papers and recruiting and retention efforts especially. And while it's only the beginning, I think there's an accountability factor that's at play today that might not have been as strong in the past. And it's being bolstered by the employees in the organization that are speaking up regarding the inequities that they see throughout the firm and the industries, as well as nonprofit organizations as well, and the leadership within the firm. And also allies that are speaking up more in our candid conversations that we have at Cognizant. And so I think this is an exciting path that the industry is on. It's not without challenges or missteps, but I believe that everyone, diverse and non-diverse, are starting to really understand where EDI fits in the workplace and in the industry, and understanding that it's important to have EDI front and center in the organizations to really bring out the authenticity and the connection and the sense of inclusion and belonging for all of the employees. And I think it's something that we long knew at Simon, right? And it's just catching up for consulting industries. And I'm really excited to see it. In fact, a perfect example today, I received an email from Cognizant's CEO, and we are having a new initiative for Q4 called All Belong, which is a multi-month recognition and celebration of the importance of belonging and inclusion to our global company and to society broadly. That came again from our CEO, but also featured our new head of diversity inclusion, Shamika Young at Cognizant. So I see a lot of great change, a lot of dialogue happening, and I'm excited to see it continue.
That's great, and we would love to see how that develops as well. And as we hear Krystalyn talk about sort of what she's experienced, after joining Cognizant, and I know that there's been an acceleration. Josh, maybe you can give us a little bit more of a historical, a little bit more longer term perspective about both in terms of sort of how the ecosystem of consulting has changed to adjust, and if there's something about kind of the consulting industry that is more specific, about the way it may approach or support EDI.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit broader than consulting. I started in banking, and banks have been subject to the Community Reinvestment Act, and that has driven some of their activities. And then I worked at Freddie Mac for 10 years. The government-sponsored entities are have a very explicit mission. In fact, it's embedded in their charter. They have affordable lending goals, and a lot of people work for the government-sponsored entities, in particular because of the feel-good nature of the work that they do. And now working for a mission-oriented consulting firm, again, it's kind of embedded within the mission. And so, particularly with the last two institutions that I've worked with, the mission has been sort of an important part of it. But yet I'll say that I'm a little surprised that EDI or diversity, equity, and inclusion is being thought of as new, because I had thought that coming out of the late 90s that we had established that diversity and equity and inclusion were kind of standard business as usual. And I think we all we as a society got a wake-up call over the last 2 years that we have a lot more work to be done. And even within mission-oriented organizations, I encourage us to not be complacent. So, for instance, there's some initiatives that have been launched, and they're sometimes framed in the sense of trying to fix something. So there is a diversity, equity, and inclusion problem, and I really like to see organizations go on the offensive with diversity and equity and inclusion, because when you frame diversity and equity and inclusion as a problem that needs to be solved, it implicitly indicates that once you achieve that milestone, well, then you don't have to pay attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I mean, diversity and equity and inclusion at this point should be as natural as having a human resources department. We're all focused on diversity and equity and inclusion. So I'm in some sense surprised, but also encouraged that I think we're getting to that mainstay where this is just a natural part of how we do business.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly be a long-standing, kind of I don't want to even call it an initiative, but a mission and a value at Simon. And I absolutely agree that we saw a kind of a renewed focus and some pledges that of what we have sort of seen last year, but it's sort of making it the fabric of an organization, making it really a fabric of the organization rather than some sort of an initiative that stands alone. And maybe Odochi, you can give us a little bit of a perspective of somebody coming into kind of the consulting recruiting landscape and going on an internship and as a second-year MBA students, what is the landscape you see, and how does it connect to sort of what you've learned or learning at Simon or experiencing at Simon as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And to Josh's point, I think after the events that transpired last summer with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we had a moment, nationwide and maybe even globally, EDI was thrust to the forefront of the minds of individuals, but also of corporations, and so I think Simon had already been moving in a direction that was keeping EDI top of mind. But what I found now, in my experience, as I'm recruiting with consulting firms as well as Fortune 500 firms, what I found is that now companies are working to really level, make sure that the playing field is level as far as some implicit biases that they might have already, prior to created space for. And so how I've seen that manifest sometimes has been some firms now doing like a resume blind behavior interview. And so the interviewer has not seen your resume, doesn't know what school you went to, or what your background is. They just know like the candidate's name. And so that's just one type of initiative that I've seen. Also, what I've seen is now a lot of firms working to either create diversity and affinity groups that they did not have, or connecting interviewers or potential candidates to those affinity groups earlier on in the process, in an effort to make the candidates feel comfortable as they are going through their application process. And so that's been helpful for me, to just know that there are individuals who look like me at those firms, but then also as far as like the resume blind approach, it's just helpful to be able to excuse me, to be able to know that coming into the process with an interviewer, you're on a level playing field and starting from the same starting spot that all other candidates are. So those are two big things that I've seen. And then as far as my experience this summer, this past summer, I had the opportunity to work as a medical strategy consultant at Cardinal Health, and they had a very big affinity group called BOLD for African Americans. And so that was a great opportunity to connect with that group, to learn about what they were doing to support initiatives like the United Negro College Fund. So being able to get plugged in with groups like that definitely bolstered my summer experience this past summer.
That's great to learn and hear about some of these initiatives that the firms are taking on. I think it's great to have of course, the mission and the values stated, but to actually put resources and thought and infrastructure around it certainly goes a long way, and certainly allows firms to walk the walk and not just talk the talk, which brings us to sort of thinking about talking about these initiatives, talking about how to sort of weave EDI into the fabric of an institution, whether that's a corporate or a nonprofit like us, an educational institution. Krystalyn, I would love to hear sort of, have you seen sort of or thought about an analytical framework or something maybe you've even learned at our, very analytics focused MBA program that eliminated the way EDI issues can be approached? Because at the end of the day, we've promised the audience that we would like to be able to give them some sort of, tools in their toolkit onto how to approach this. Because these are complicated issues that involves a lot of change. It involves a lot of talent management, human resources, and I know that you're part of that change management. So we would love to hear about some approaches.
Sure. So I think from the framework perspective, one of the first frameworks I learned coming into Simon was the FACT method, which we use throughout our time at Simon. So framing, analyzing, communicating the results and the data that we see. So I think this is applicable to the EDI initiatives that companies, especially and consulting firms, are developing and their EDI initiatives. And so, for example, one opportunity that I had to kind of leverage data and implement the FACT method was just last week when I was recruiting at the National Black MBA Conference's virtual career fair. And to just provide the background, I also have recruited at the in-person career fair in 2019. So while I know that there are some advantages and disadvantages to having a virtual instead of an in-person format for a conference, one unique advantage that I saw for virtual conferences is that I was able to access the platform data on the candidates that came to our booth. I was able to see who attended, and you always had resumes, right? But now I'm able to export an Excel of all of the candidates that came, how long they engaged with our materials, which resources they engaged with. And so I was fascinated by the dashboard behind the scenes that we recruiters are able to access. And I felt that this was an excellent way to, as Adochu was saying, level the playing field, right? Because when you're at a busy conference, talking to hundreds of candidates, you don't necessarily have time to organize that data in such a way. So initially coming in, understanding, okay, what is our goal and what is our objective of attending the National Black MBA Conference, and then being able to have access to this data, I got really excited. It took me back to my Simon days, kind of leveraging the dashboards and all the data that was available, because I think this is giving us an organized, systematic approach to accessing diverse candidates, the objective of the conference, and that we're able to make more effective decisions with that information after the conference. And then another piece that I would add is that attending a virtual conference levels the playing field for those candidates who are unable to travel or have other financial obligations, family obligations. So I enjoyed the conference, and I'm excited about the bright side of virtual formats, because we have that data that we can leverage.
That's, yes, absolutely. I mean, it certainly warms my heart to hear about how you're using our sort of analytical approaches, in your current position, but especially to address some of these questions about, how do we make it, at the end of the day, the equity piece. Sometimes this gets a little bit misinterpreted, right? When we talk about equity, people think that that means everybody gets exactly the same salary or exactly the same title or exactly the same position. But I hear you and Odochi and Josh talk about the fact that this is about leveling the playing field, which what we mean by is equity of opportunity and equity of access, right? When we think about sort of the students who can and cannot travel to these recruiting events, we can talk about sort of being able to get in front of an audience, because not being able to give that access means that we're ignoring a swath of talent in our midst, no matter where they come, whether the diversity is about ethnic diversity, gender diversity, socioeconomic diversity, that we are really, to our own detriment, not allowing that talent to showcase themselves. And that is not the best way, as we know, we want to pursue talent management. And at the end of the day, while you're doing these sort of data analytics on the side, and we're thinking about sort of different initiatives, we do have to convince kind of whether it's our boards or our C-suite or, or our board, about kind of these initiatives and why they're important to the organization. So Josh, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what are some of the elements that need to be addressed or justified, and how does one build an effective case for EDI initiatives to be presented to the executive suite?
Yeah, there's two that I hope are equally compelling. One comes at it just from the angle of you develop a corporate culture, you develop a mission, vision, and values, and you want to stay consistent with that mission, vision, and values. The board of directors should certainly be thinking about that, and that should be forefront of their mind. And in fact, certain aspects of this, kind of get reviewed systematically, especially at large corporations. The other, in particular, with relation to consulting, really gets to the bottom line, which is there are business opportunities for diverse consulting companies, and so this I work. Summit is about 80% federal contracting, 20% commercial. It's especially true in federal, but I can talk about commercial as well. Your clients have supplier diversity goals. So if you are a diverse supplier, you should advertise to your potential customers that you're a diverse supplier. If you're not a diverse supplier, maybe you want strategic partnerships with diverse suppliers, and that will enable you to do business with certain firms. In the government sector, federal contracting very frequently has socioeconomic goals, and so there's an 8A program, which is meant to encourage small businesses. It's also meant to encourage small minority businesses, and so that is a natural part of federal contracting is either at same sort of thing, but it's a little bit more formal because it's part of the solicitation. You will demonstrate when you're writing a proposal how you meet those socioeconomic goals. And you want to have a network of partnerships with diverse teaming partners if your firm in and of itself is not considered diverse.
So in talking of the business case that sort of the business opportunities or some of the opportunities that one can have, looking outside of the organization, as well as obviously within the organization, to be able to reach those goals. If you could, Josh, maybe also elaborate a little bit for us about, how do I put together an EDI strategy for my organization? What are some of the main steps that I must follow? And what are some of maybe the pitfalls that I should try to avoid that one tends to, we all try to do these as effectively as possible, as inclusively as possible, but sometimes it is not so easy to know where the rabbit holes are. And we want to be able to make progress. So.
Yeah, so there, I'll talk about, some of the dimensions of, and, also the different components, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, when you're getting started, coming up with a equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy, you first have to determine, organizationally who's going to be accountable. So, is it your managing partner? Is it, multiple partners? So then, once you make that decision, you have to kind of assess where you're at as an organization and come up with a process to continually assess where you're at. So, how are you going to go about data gathering? So a lot of us are adding questions to our employee survey or instituting employee drop boxes, just to get a better read on where we need to improve. And I'll tell you, once you get that data and you try to implement things, the equity and diversity parts, while super important, it's a little easier to assess where you're at. I think inclusion is particularly tricky, and I think there's a lot more work to be done. It's a little bit softer in terms of trying to sort of assess where you are on a inclusivity standpoint. We're very project based, and you may want to look at the diversity within projects. So are you diverse as an entire organization? But when you separate out into different projects or different contracts, are you diverse sort of within that subset? And it's also probably natural when we're talking about this subject to thinking about our employees, about the attract and retaining talent aspect. But there's other aspects to it, some of which I alluded to earlier. But your strategy may also include suppliers. So, consultants have suppliers too. We are suppliers in the sense that we're vendors, but we have our own set of suppliers. It includes teaming partners. So, who's your network of teaming partners? And it includes who you're doing business with. Are you trying to be diverse yourself, but you're not doing business with a diverse network of clients? That could be telling too, if it's you want all of those to be interwoven, and more importantly, deliberate. What are you trying to attain across all of those different dimensions?
So yes, I mean, it's those are the steps that I completely agree that inclusion part, not only because it's a little bit more qualitative and hard to set sort of very specific, perhaps quantitative goals that one can think about achieving. But the inclusivity part is very important, because at the end of the day, we only become an effective organization, an effective team, if the people really feel that they have a seat at the table, they have a voice at the table, that their talent and what they bring to the organization is managed well, and that's definitely a place where the value added will shine, and really can be spotlighted. So I'm really glad to hear about kind of also consulting firms, including other corporations, really sort of looking at the landscape in which they operate and say, who are we working with, who are we partnering with, who are our clients? What is it's not just about sort of what are we doing internally, but what mission are we trying to achieve as an overall system and an industry. So that's really heartening to hear as well. And I think that's a very good lesson as well, when we think about even our own industry, which is higher education. But these strategies, these sort of action plans or mission and visions and goals, as we set them, or as we put these values and these plans together, they're not without some at times pushback. They're not without some skepticism on the part of maybe some few or more, depending on where one starts from. And I know that we've all faced, as we develop these measures, as we develop these initiatives, as we develop these action plans, have faced some of these sort of bottlenecks or arguments. So how do we manage that resistance? Krystalyn, you're our change management expert, so we would love to hear from you.
Yes, absolutely. Managing resistance is what I do on a regular basis. And according to PROSCI, you can look them up, PROSCI. They are established change methodology house and nonprofit organization. which have done extensive research on change, and resistance to change is absolutely normal and it's to be expected because change creates anxiety and fear. And the current state has tremendous holding power, and the uncertainty of success and fear of the unknown can block change and create that resistance. And the root cause of resistance comes from specific concerns that impacted individuals may be feeling, and it might also hinge on their self-interest or their belief system, for example. So the most significant barrier to change include the uncertainty of success and the fear of the unknown. And so, for example, if we relate it to EDI, are the employees unsure of how changing the status quo in the organization with inclusion of these different ED&I efforts and measures, how is that going to impact their day-to-day activities? And we can address these concerns through very normal and human interactions through a few different ways. One is through training and education, whether it be formal anti-bias or unconscious bias training, as well as just having dialogues and storytelling, and taking more of a bottom-up approach where the employees are organizing, are communicating and educating each other. Also communicating what's in it for me. You know, how will I be successful if I accept or adopt these changes? I think employees think it's great that the organization is going to benefit. It's going to have greater public branding and public good, but you know, how does that impact me personally on a day-to-day level? Communicating the costs and risk of resistance and the benefits of adoption helps to provide clarity of what's changing and how the change will benefit everyone. And I think finally, leadership alignment. So also coming in with that top-down approach, kind of the messages from the CEOs, the messages from managers helps to reinforce, you know, the importance of EDI in organizations, and kind of gives employees that kind of go ahead to incorporate those EDI initiatives, especially as we know organizations and especially consulting firms are very hierarchical because you have to make decisions very quickly. So that management, I think buy-in, the constant communication from management as well as from all levels of the organization will help with reducing that resistance.
Well, those are definitely very useful you know, tips or insights into how to manage that, not just in the EDI initiatives, and certainly kind of thinking about sort of change management. But there, you know, there's a both an art, but also a science to this, right? Change management. This is just another type of change management that we have to kind of you know, work through, and there are some true and tried methods in approaching this. So I hear about training. I hear about communication. I certainly hear about sort of, you know, Josh's steps to building out a new strategy. And maybe Odochi, you can tell us a little bit about, or maybe, you know, add on to what are some of the organizational resources or architecture that are essential. We hear a lot about sort of, you know, hiring a diversity, equity, and inclusion director, somebody that either sits within the C-suite or sometimes just within HR. We hear about different ways where, you know, that organizational changes come about. What are your views on this?
Yeah, I think Krystalyn made a great point about, you know, leadership buy-in, and I will include leadership vision. I'll share a quick story about my summer experience this past summer. We had some time to sit down in an executive roundtable with the CEO of Cardinal Health, Mike Kaufman, and he shared his experience about when he and his head of HR decided that they were going to, you know, become more active on some of their diversity and inclusion initiatives. And they talked about taking a team of executives down to see the museum that was just recently erected in DC, and to learn about the Black experience. And based on that, you know, taking back some of the learnings that they took to, inform how they wanted to approach that. And so I think having, that senior level vision and buy-in is important. And then just moving forward, I think once you start to look further into the organization, it's important to have employee resource groups that are passionate about championing these causes. Because oftentimes, if there's not anyone championing it, it's easy for, other possibly bottom line initiatives to cloud everyone's, kind of template. And so I think it's important to have champions who are either in the diversity and inclusion groups or affinity groups who are really, vocal advocates for these issues, whatever they may be. And then the last is that, you do need to have personnel who are passionate and interested in attending and getting involved. During my time at Roswell Park, prior to business school, I was the social chair for our African-American affinity group called Aaron. And what we did was, really try to engage new employees who were of African-American background and just let them know that this resource was available to them. And through that, we were able to build a critical mass of individuals who were passionate about the community and championing causes. And so it's just important to, kind of take the time to really, like, from the grassroots level, build up that interest, because it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, we're interested in this, but it's another thing to actually have the individuals who are going to roll their sleeves up and, get involved in the community, or, roll their sleeves up and bring issues that they want to see changed up to the administration. And so that was one way that we were able to do that, is just, meeting new people, tabling at new employee orientation and just sharing that information to get people signed up. And so I think that's important. And once senior level leadership sees that fervor and that groundswell, they'll be able to, kind of, understand that they're, moving in the right direction. So I think those are three big ways that an organization can really focus on making sure that they're moving in the right direction as far as diversity, equity, inclusion.
Well, thank you for that. And as we do these, the three different ways that you've mentioned, or other ways that that we can think about on how do we build it into the architecture. Because the idea, again, from the beginning, starting with sort of Josh's statement about, we don't want these to be sort of standalone issues or initiatives, or, especially not problems to solve, but it's about the fact that this is part of our mission and values, and this is the fabric of the organization. And that there's always going to be a champion and somebody who keeps it. But that also requires that we look at sort of outcomes, right? I'm an economist. I certainly look at outcomes and measure output a lot. And I want to make sure that we are hitting the marks. If for nothing, we certainly want to know what else we can do and how we can reformulate our approaches, and how we can sort of, put more resources in the right places to be able to bring about the change and hit the goals that we want to hit. So what are some of examples of benchmarks or KPIs to track and measure success of these kinds of initiatives? And Krystalyn, since you've done a lot of sort of change management, I'm sure that you have in your toolbox many of these to sort of say, here's what the changes brought us, and here's what this can bring us. So what do you track?
Sure. And I want to first start by saying change management, or the management of EDI initiatives, is really, everyone's responsibility, is not just the senior level, although the senior levels might be measuring and ensuring that the outcomes are achieved. But EDI metrics, there's many, and they can be used to identify risk areas, prioritize initiatives, set targets and program goals, assign accountability, and measure the impact of initiatives. And I think it's important to have metrics that focus on multiple different aspects. So anywhere from the financial return on investment just to the focus on equality and fairness. Mm-hmm. And I think this earlier, that choosing these metrics sometimes is an art and not always a science, but as long as they're kind of meaningful to the business, the company's values, and they map progress towards the achievements of the organizational goals, then it's a little bit of a trial and error, right, to see what works. And some examples of EDI metrics that I've seen are the monitoring or measurement just of the population demographics and the representation of diverse and protected classes, gender diversity, race, ethnicity, age, ability, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. You can look at retention information by demographics, as well as promotion, pay and benefit studies. Another important one is recruitment. So comparing the number of applicants for open positions from underrepresented groups against the potential pool of applicants from underrepresented groups or the overall labor market. Employee engagement. So for example, employee engagement surveys or various focus groups, as well as exit interviews. And those will provide a wellspring of data for companies. And with respect to benchmarking, it's useful to look at the overall population, job market data, as well as for the consulting industry peers, also nonprofit organizations that are publishing information regarding EDI. I think an example that we've seen recently, and at least Cognizant, this was the first year that they reported their demographics of the diverse as well, the entire population, but of course the numbers that were of interest for most were the diverse population. And putting that information out, although it might not be where the consulting firm or Cognizant wants it to be right now, because I think it's an industry-wide challenge, it helps to set that benchmark for the industry. So I think KPIs and benchmarks should be assessed or reassessed whenever that data is getting stale, whether when it needs to be revisited, when it's not allowing the organization to continue to progress against their specific and measurable goals. And then I would also add, there's a big push to also look beyond benchmarks and hold firms accountable through creating actionable programs, making financial commitments, publicly releasing diversity data, which I just shared an anecdote just now, embedding D&I into corporate culture efforts and focusing on measurable results. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to dig into the data here, as you mentioned, and really start to measure the EDI initiatives instead of kind of having them be a marketing effort.
So that's extremely useful. And I would also love to hear, maybe just for another second, as one makes these sort of, as they become more public, and then we set some goals and we set some, measurements to look at how much we've progressed. I would love to hear from you, because for a lot of organizations, or even though I agree with Josh that this has been a imperative and something that is not just a 1 year or a 14 or a 15-month development, I think there's still a lot of unease about how to navigate this space, right? So what does one think about sort of how does it look if we have to kind of change not so much our goals, but how we think about measuring them and how we does that sort of create a credibility issue, or is that a natural part of kind of change? That change is not this linear thing and we have to kind of adapt and agile, but what is that nice balance there?
Absolutely. I think it's up to each of the organizations to determine. And again, there are those benchmarks as well. And as you also astutely noted, is that it is a change curve from just original awareness of what are EDI issues to adoption and to reinforcement of accepting and embodying those behaviors in your organization. So I think the first, it goes back to some of the points Josh has made, is creating a plan and validating that plan against others in your organization, especially the groups that are being impacted, getting feedback, and then constantly reiterating the plan, improving on the plan. And it's really as much as the organization, as long as that organization has kind of a forward-looking view on these issues, for them to challenge themselves. Yeah,
that's great to hear. So we've put the strategy together, we've developed our KPIs and our benchmarks, and we're tracking them. What are some of the sort of, benefits that we should at least have, if we want to have a sense of what are some of the short-term benefits that we will receive from a successful EDI initiative, and some of the long-term benefits, because we also want to, bring people along to not lose the momentum, to be able to point out to not just sort of against the particular measurable goals, but just sort of the benefit on the organization or on the individuals. Maybe Josh, you could give us some examples or some general insights onto these benefits.
Yeah, as this permeates throughout an organization and not is not just concentrated in the committee. I think it's really going to change the vibe of an organization, and so that it'll bring more awareness, and it will bring more empowerment of each and every one of us can do something about this. It's not just the senior level at an organization, and as people feel more active and engaged, I expect that you'll have less turnover in your organization. I expect that people will be focused on their personal development as leaders in particular. And so, again, leadership is at all different levels of the organization. And I'm increasingly seeing tremendous leadership from young people, whereas I, used to see sort of the structure of a consulting engagement where, you had, front-facing people, and then you had, people behind the scenes doing the work. Increasingly, young people are leading engagements. Young people are client-facing, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is part of leadership development. And so once this, permeates through an organization, I think people are going to feel like they're invested in. They're going to feel more energetic. An example of how it's permeating through my own organization. We have a set of mission, vision, and values, which is account management, economic sustainability, client service, cultural awareness, and data science. And some of these are very standard. Account management, they want to see that we're bringing in new business. Client service, they want to see that we're doing a good job with the client. But cultural awareness is one of those 5 pillars that will be used during performance management, and it's going to include these what we've been talking about today. What are you doing to further diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yes, and it's a core competency development that we're looking towards. It's both the, whether it's the gender, whether it's the racial or the ethnic. If we look at organizations now, just sort of the amount of it's a global landscape. We see much more, that cultural competence, cultural awareness competence, knowing that there are people who are coming into the organization with completely different educational backgrounds, completely different approaches, completely different sort of ways of thinking and wealth of experience. To be able to utilize that is a really utilize the talent and the knowledge and the wisdom in an organization. That's part of it. And Odochi, what do you see as the long-term benefits as somebody, who's perhaps, I know that you've certainly had work experience, but, relatively earlier stages of your career as well?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. As far as long-term benefits, what I see as the, kind of like the key takeaway is that representation. I feel like as we continue this discourse and action is taken into actually making sure that individuals can bring their authentic self to work, and that there is that equity, then what you will see ultimately, which is the goal, is representation in those middle management position, as well as senior level and CEO levels. I think ultimately, when we take a look now, some of what came to light last summer when we, took a look at the landscape of what the breakdown and the makeup of was of CEOs and senior level leadership. What we hope is that with these initiatives, you'll start to then see diverse candidates breaking through into those positions. And I think ultimately, if we can see that, then we've, have been, somewhat successful in what our initiatives and efforts were targeted at.
Great. Well, we have only a few minutes left and we have 2 questions, and I'll just throw it out to the panelists to answer, and whoever wants to jump in. One of them is about sort of, how do you recommend best collecting the data on applicants' self-identification? Because without the data, there's quite limited ability to compare applicants to populations. I think, Krystalyn, you mentioned this sort of, what does our applicant pool look like, the kind of the makeup of the population that we're drawing from? Is there good ways to work around that? Do you have any ideas and insights you can share with us?
Yeah, that definitely represents a challenge when we don't receive the data through the self-identification process. I think another way to work around it is that you don't necessarily need the data to work internally within your organization to affect change. So you have also the business resource groups, and through those employees are able to self-identify or share that they are an ally for a specific group, and that is another great way to impact the culture of an organization, is to work through those various affinity groups. At Cognizant, we have veterans, working parents, LGBTQ women, every single group. So that's another great opportunity. It's not statistics that you can share or publish externally, but it's still working through the organization. Okay,
well, thank you. The other question is that one of the biggest hurdles to diversity and inclusion is the fear we have for changing our opinions. Is the workplace the best place to start on this, or can we do more in our communities and schools? For a school, as somebody who's the dean of a school, we certainly are starting it earlier, but perhaps even earlier in our community. So what do you think about that? Is it too late almost, maybe, when we come to the workplace? Can we also, what we learn from the workplace, and push it out into kind of an earlier stage?
Yeah, I mean, there's a suggestion in that question, which is, I wholeheartedly agree with. And it's certainly things that I think we should all, and it's more than just training our minds. I mean, I think there's structural changes that need to be made, before we get to attracting and recruiting certain folks. I'd love to have a more diverse pool, for instance, of PhD economists or folks who work in data science. We can do something about that at this level, but yes, I mean, there's a whole set of changes that need to be made, and I'm glad that folks are recognizing that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a good conversation topic for another time, since we're at time, how to sort of cultivate that pool and that training at a much earlier age and a much earlier stage. And I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, Josh, Krystalyn, and Odochi, for joining us and for your conversation and your insights. And thank you to our great audience for spending some time with us. And as I've mentioned at the beginning, this is recorded and we will post it at the Simon YouTube channel. So if you want to share it with your networks and your friends and your colleagues, please do so. We would really appreciate it. And I think there's more people discussing and finding solutions and finding ways to advance EDI in our organization and community, the better. So we invite you to continue this conversation with us and with each other. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.